Hello and welcome back to week 2 of ANTHRO 340. Last week we set up what I called the central tension running through this course. The tension between the universal and the particular when it comes to games. On one side, she's meant to Halley and Bennett. They're telling us that play is a psychological state, a mode of experience characterized by absorption, by the merging of action and awareness, by the suspension of the anxious self-conscious subject. On the other side, Geertz is telling us that the cockfight is first and foremost a cultural text, a story the Balinese tell themselves about themselves, and that you cannot understand it without being inside the social world that gives it meaning. This week we're going to press on that tension, and the pressure is going to come from a single concept: the magic circle. So last week we read the first chapter of Homo Ludens, Huizinga's 1938 account of play as a generative ground of culture. So you've already met the magic circle. You've met the actual passage, the arena, the card table, the magic circle, the temple, the stage, the screen, the tennis court, the court of justice. All are temporary worlds within the ordinary world, dedicated to the performance of an act apart. That list is what we're going to pause on. Look at what's in it. Courts of justice, temples, the stage. Huizinga isn't only describing games. He's describing the full range of human activities that involve stepping outside ordinary life into a bounded space with its own rules and its own internal stakes. His argument is that this is not a peripheral feature of human existence, but one of its most fundamental dimensions. Civilization arises in and as play, not from play, but as it. We've also read his formal definition. Play is voluntary, separate from ordinary life, bounded in space and time, governed by absolute rules and tending towards community. But we've also read what I think is the most analytically pointed moment in the chapter, the distinction between the cheat and the spoil sport. The cheat acknowledges the magic circle. They just try to win dishonestly within it. The spoil sport shatters the circle by refusing to play at all. And Huizinga makes the observation that society tends to be more lenient with the cheat than the spoil sport, because the spoil sport threatens the existence of the play community itself, not just the outcome of a single game. So let's hold on to that distinction, and let's consider this week how my Consalvo picks it up. So Huizinga established the framework of the magic circle. Roger Caillois, writing in the generation after him, sharpened it into a slightly different direction. For Caillois, what defines play is its lack of material consequence. Play, he writes, is an occasion of pure waste. It produces nothing outside itself. You can spend 3 hours playing a board game, and at the end of those 3 hours the world is precisely as it was before. Nothing has been made, nothing has been redistributed. This, for Caillois, is what makes play play. It's the negative definition of the concept. Play is what happens when the stakes of everyday life are suspended. So together, Huizinga and Caillois gave game study scholars something very useful, a clean, formal definition. It distinguished games from other human activities by pointing to their bounded, consequence-free quality. And it suggested an answer to a question that had long puzzled people. Why do players invest such enormous emotional energy in things that, by any external measure, don't matter? Because inside the circle, they claim, they do matter. The magic circle creates its own stakes, its own logic, and its own temporary reality. The problem is that this very clean, very formal idea turns out to be far too tidy to account for what actually happens when people play games. And nowhere is this more visible than in online games and MMOs, which is where this week's readings come in. So Maya Consalvo's 2009 paper is one of the most direct and productively provocative interventions in game studies from that time. The title, There is no magic circle, and the lens she uses to make her argument is cheating, which of course is exactly where Huizinga put some of his own sharpest analytical pressure. Consalvo is picking up his terminology deliberately and pulling it in a different direction. Cheating might seem like a strange way in, but Consalvo is right that it's actually a uniquely revealing one. Because the question of what counts as cheating, what crosses a line, which lines are legitimate, who gets to draw them, forces you to articulate what you think the rules actually are and where they actually stop. She opens with a scene in the city of Juno, in the world of Vanadiel, in the game world of Final Fantasy XI, which I've not actually played, so if I mispronounce these terms, please forgive me. A player named Kofgood is being harassed by other players. He's being slapped and shouted at in the game world. People are furious with him. Why? Because Kofgood is a suspected guild seller, engaged in what's called real money trade, RMT. He's selling in-game currency for real money outside the game. By Huizinga's logic, this should be irrelevant. What happens in the game stays in the game. The magic circle contains the consequences. But of course that's exactly what the other players don't believe. They're angry because Kofgood is doing in the game what he's doing in the game is affecting a real economy. An in-game economy, yes, but one they've invested real time and effort in. One that has real meaning to them. The boundary between the game world and the outside world is not holding. So Consalvo then develops this through a detailed account of cheating practices across different games. And what she finds consistently is that players themselves don't agree on what cheating is. The boundaries are contested, and they're contextual and shifting. Some players who use cheat codes feel they need to justify it. I only did it after already completing the game once. Others cheat openly and feel fine about it. The concept of earned achievement runs through many accounts. Players want to feel that their progress is a result of genuine skill and effort, and cheating can undermine that. But what counts as genuine is never settled in advance. She then focuses on the WoW Glider, a bot for World of Warcraft that automates leveling. You set it running on a character, and it fights its way through the game without you. Blizzard, who make WoW, consider it a violation of the terms of service. But look at who uses it and why. Some players are using it to power level characters they want to sell for real money. Others are using it to get a second or third character through content they've already played through. So they can try different playstyles. Some are using it to skip the early grind and get to the content they actually find interesting. These are not the same act, and they don't have the same meaning. If all you can say about the WoW Glider is it violates the rules of the game, you've said almost nothing interesting about it at all. You need the context. You need to understand what these players are doing and why, what the game means to them, and why they're trying to get out of it. Consalvo's alternative to the magic circle draws on Erving Goffman's concept of frames. For Goffman, social life is organised through frames, structures that tell us how to interpret what's happening around us. Rather than a single bounded space set apart from ordinary life, what we have in gameplay is a rapid and fluent movement between multiple frames. The real world frame, the game rules frame, the fantasy world frame of the game itself. Players move between these frames all the time, easily and without friction. What Consalvo, following Gary Allen Fine's work on tabletop role-playing games, calls up-keying and down-keying. Your phone rings mid-raid. You down-key immediately from the fantasy frame to the real world. Deal with it, and up-key back into the game. You bring knowledge from outside the game into it, and you bring experiences from inside the game into your conversations outside it. The real world intrudes constantly. I just got a notification here from WhatsApp. The real world intrudes constantly, and that intrusion is not a violation of the game's integrity. It's just how games actually work. Consalvo's conclusion is good to quote directly. We cannot say that games are magic circles. where the ordinary rules of life do not apply. Of course they apply, but in addition to, in competition with, other rules and in relation to multiple contexts across varying cultures and into different groups, legal situations and homes. Games on this view are not sealed off worlds. They are contextual dynamic activities, and they mean what they mean through the act of playing them, which is always an act performed by real people in real circumstances with real stakes that are never fully contained by the game's own rules. So also this week, Thomas Malaby's paper, Anthropology and Play, takes the critique of the magic circle further, and in a more theoretically ambitious direction. He's not just saying the magic circle is empirically wrong, the way Consalvo says it. He's arguing that the tradition is wrong, that the way we've been thought about play since Huizinga, in both the materialist and the cultural branches of that tradition, have been systematically limited from the start. The materialist tradition, which Malaby traces through the influence of Marx on 20th century anthropology, treated play as basically the opposite of work. Play, work. Work is serious, productive, stakes-filled. Play is unserious, unproductive, consequence-free. Caillois' occasion of pure waste is the clearest expression of this. And because anthropology during this period was heavily shaped by materialist frameworks, play simply wasn't taken seriously as an object of study. The Society for the Anthropology of Work existed. The Society for the Anthropology of Play always struggled to find institutional purchase. On the other hand, the representationalist tradition, this is through Geertz, was a huge corrective to this. Suddenly play could matter enormously, because it was a text, a symbolic statement, a means by which a culture reflects on itself. The cockfight is not pure waste. It's a profound commentary on status, masculinity, and the relationship between civilization and animality. But Malaby argues that Geertz has his own problem. In his zeal to give the cockfight genuine cultural weight, Geertz makes the game a commentary on a static social order. Status is at stake symbolically, but no one's status is actually altered by the outcome of a cockfight. It is only, and that momentarily, affirmed or insulted. The game, in Geertz's hands, becomes a kind of ritual confirmation of what is already known. Nothing is actually at risk in any kind of open-ended way. And what Malaby says is, this misses what is most important about games. What is most important about games is their indeterminacy. Their outcomes are genuinely uncertain. Nobody knows how it's going to turn out. That open-endedness, the irreducible contingency, is not a peripheral feature of games. It is the feature. It is what makes them compelling, what gives them the power to generate legitimate outcomes, what makes them matter in ways that are not reducible to either material consequences or symbolic confirmation. Play, for Malaby, should be understood not as a bounded activity, something you do inside a circle, but as a disposition. A readiness to improvise in the face of an ever-changing world that admits no transcendently ordered account. This is a philosophical claim rooted in American pragmatism, in the picture of a world offered by thinkers like William James and John Dewey, for whom the universe is, in Louis Menon's phrase, shot through with contingency. Things happen that weren't meant to happen, plans go sideways, unexpected things emerge, and the actor who is alive to this contingency, who doesn't try to reduce the world to a set of predictable outcomes, who improvises in the face of uncertainty, this is the playful actor. So this reframing allows Malaby to make a crucial distinction between game as a cultural form, the structured activity like the chessboard, an MMO, or Geertz's cockfight, and play as a mode of experience, the disposition toward contingency and the readiness to improvise. A game may or may not produce play. Playing the right way, with full engagement, fully open to the indeterminate outcome, is not guaranteed by the existence of the game itself. You can go through the motions of a game without genuinely playing, and conversely, the playful disposition might be found in activities that we don't conventionally call games. His example of the Berlin Olympics in 1936 is illuminating in this regard. The Nazi regime were attempting to use games the way you use ritual, to confirm a predetermined ideological outcome, in this case the supremacy of the Aryan athlete. They had the administration of the games, the visual spectacle, the apparatus of a state propaganda machine behind them, and it was working, right up until Jesse Owens ran. Owens won 4 gold medals, and in doing so demolished the racial hierarchy of the Nazi project, which they were attempting to demonstrate. And crucially, what he exploited was the legitimate indeterminacy of games. Unlike a ritual, a game cannot simply be managed to produce the right outcome. The outcome is supposed to be contingent. That's the whole point. And so when an institution tries to use a game the way you use a ritual, to confirm what you've already decided to be true, the game can escape and it can bite back or run wild. Malaby ends by applying this to the contemporary moment. Institutions of all kinds, corporations, platforms, digital companies, are increasingly deploying game-like structures to manage their users and generate value. Gold farming, where players in low-wage economies are paid to accumulate in-game currency to sell to players in high-wage economies. Top coder, where programmers compete in game-like contests and the winning code is kept by the company. Or Google's image labeling game. These are all examples of what Malaby calls Ludo-Capitalism. Institutions harnessing the playful disposition to extract creative and productive labour while appearing merely to offer a game. The player thinks they're playing. The company knows they're working. And the legitimacy of the whole arrangement depends on the game's apparent indeterminacy. The sense that anyone could win, that the outcome is genuinely open, even as the institutional structure is designed to channel that indeterminacy toward very particular ends. So Ludo-Capitalism is a term worth holding on to as a thread for the rest of the course. The play-work question, which we planted last week when Huizinga and Bennett described games as design technologies for producing flow, is being named here as a structural problem, not just a philosophical puzzle. Whenever you see an institution deploying game-like structures to extract labour while appearing to offer a game, that is Ludo-Capitalism in operation. So we're going to encounter that more sharply in weeks 7 and 8, when we follow virtual labour all the way to the shop floor of the Chinese gold farm. Okay, moving on to O'Donnell. Casey O'Donnell's 2014 paper on Balinese cockfights deeply extending play is a different kind of contribution. It's less a critique than an act of advocacy, and a call to take seriously what Geertz's methodology actually demands of us as analysts of games. O'Donnell teaches game design, and he opens his courses every time with deep play. Not Huizinga or Huizinga, but Geertz. He does this, he says, as an antidote to the kind of theoretically reductive thinking that dominates ruminations on games and play. The risk in game studies is always that the game becomes the focus at the expense of everything around it. The mechanics, the rules, the system, the platform, and what gets lost is meaning. O'Donnell's central formulation is that games are not merely reflective of culture or generative of culture or within culture. Games are in, as of, and through culture. They're intensely interwoven with it. Games produce culture, they reflect it back, they shift it. If a student of his ever says, it's just a game, he says, he would have failed. From Geertz, O'Donnell draws out 3 lessons for thinking about games. First, games are not only played, but spectated. The superorganism of people packed around the cockfight ring are as much a part of the event as the cocks and their owners. Games have publics. They exist in social worlds that are watching, judging, narrating, Think about what a World of Warcraft raid looks like on Twitch, or the social world of competitive Pokemon, or even the guild drama that ripples outward from a badly handled loot system. The game is always bigger than its mechanics. Second, for O'Donnell, games are always embedded in contexts that matter. The Balinese cockfight is embedded in a set of social relationships, hierarchies, alliances, and enmities that shape everything about it. Who bets with whom? What the centre bet signals about your standing in the community. Whether bringing a cock from outside the village is an act of prestige or provocation. And O'Donnell's point is that digital games are equally embedded in corporate structures, in platform economies, in subcultures with their own histories and values, even when those contexts are less visible than the kinship structures of a Balinese village. Thirdly, and most importantly, the embeddedness is precisely what makes games matter. It's what makes them deep. O'Connell quotes Geertz's great summary line, "The cockfight renders ordinary, everyday experience comprehensible by presenting it in terms of acts and objects which have had their practical consequences removed and reduced or raised to the level of sheer appearances, where their meaning can be more powerfully articulated and more exactly perceived." So the game strips away the practical urgency and lets you see the shape of things. It's a kind of clarity machine. O'Donnell also makes an important methodological point. Geertz didn't become accepted by the Balinese villagers by observing the cockfight from a respectful academic distance. As we said last week, he ran, he got caught up in it, he became implicated, and it was precisely that implication, that loss of the outsider's detachment, that opened the community to him. For O'Donnell, this is not just an anecdote about ethnographic method. It's a model for how to think about games analytically. The analyst is always implicated. You cannot hold the game at arm's length and expect to understand it. You have to, as he puts it, inhabit it, to be caught up in it in some way, if you're going to have access to what's actually going on. So he calls for thinking of games as experimental systems, open-ended apparatuses that generate surprises, produce differences, and refuse to be hardened into fixed categories. The goal of analysis, on his view, is not to classify games definitively, but to follow them into the contexts they inhabit, to stay open to what they're doing, and to resist the epistemological arteriosclerosis, the hardening of the categories, that too often closes down inquiry before it's really begun. So where does this leave us? You read Huizinga last week. This week, 3 papers which are related but distinct critiques of the tradition he founded. Consalvo demolishes it empirically. Games are porous. The real world leaks in constantly through real money trade, bots, and other social contexts players bring into the game with them. Players are not inside the circle, they're moving fluidly between multiple frames. The game is a contextual meaning-making activity, not a bounded space with fixed edges. Malaby comes at it theoretically. The real problem with the magic circle is not that it's factually wrong about how games work, but that it misrepresents what is most important about play. Its genuine indeterminacy. Play is a disposition, as a readiness to improvise in the face of an irreducibly contingent world, is not something that can be sealed inside a circle. And as institutions increasingly try to harness play for their own purposes, being clear about this distinction becomes genuinely politically important. O'Donnell takes the critique somewhere more generative. Rather than just replacing a wrong theory with a better one, he's asking us to use games as experimental systems, to let them generate surprise, to stay close to the specificity and context of actual games in actual social worlds, to resist the pull towards categories that are clean but empty. And what all 3 of them share, the thing that connects this week's readings to last week's, is a deep suspicion of any account of games that strips away context in the name of formal clarity. Sheasman, Halley and Bennett give us a powerful account of what the experience of play feels like, but the magic circle went too far in the other direction, using that experience to license an abstraction that conveniently forgot about everything that was happening outside the game. For us, studying MMOs, these questions are anything but academic. The games you're playing right now exist inside corporate platforms. Their rules are made by institutions with financial interests. The social worlds you're entering have their own histories, their own economies, their own hierarchies and status games that predate your arrival and will continue after you leave. You're not entering a magic circle, you're entering a social world. So let's notice what has happened to the 3 threads introduced last week. The boundary question, where does the game end, has been pulled apart in 2 directions simultaneously. Consalvo shows the real world constantly pressing in, money, social history, real consequences for cheating. Malaby shows game-like structures pressing outward into the real world through Ludo-Capitalism. The boundary is not merely porous, it may not be a stable object at all. The assumed player question is implicit in both Consalvo and Malaby, but neither addresses it directly. When Huizinga defines the magic circle as a space of voluntary stepping out from ordinary life, he is describing an experience available to those who have the freedom to step out. Not everyone does. That is a question the next several weeks will address. Whose body is doing the playing? Who built the circle they're playing inside? And on what terms was the invitation extended? And finally, the play work question has now been named properly. Even if the examples Malaby give us remain somewhat abstract, what it looks like when the distinction collapses in actual bodies and actual workplaces is where weeks 7 and 8 will take us. So until then, keep playing, keep noting, and keep asking, what is actually at stake here? Who is it at stake for, and who built the circle in the first place?